Hey, y'all, welcome in. My name's Jeff Nowak, WWL Radio and Odyssey digital sports producer, coming at you today with a quick video. Did want to debut my new setup here. The setup I had throughout the season was driving me nuts. I had a full green screen behind me. It looked like I was floating in the middle of a room. That is no more. There's still a little green screen over to my right, but I think it looks a lot better. I think it will be less distracting. Hopefully the audio is coming through well. I have a new mic setup here, so I hope that sounds good for y'all. And if not, we'll fix it. Without further ado, I did want to get into my 5 biggest questions for the Saints, and we can do that officially today because the Super Bowl has ended. The Los Angeles Rams walked off the field with the Lombardi Trophy, and the rest of the NFL's 31 NFL teams walked off, the last being the Bengals, in disappointment. And they all have to figure out how they're going to become the Rams of next season and bring home the trophy themselves. And the Saints have as many questions going into the 2022 offseason as any NFL team. Thankfully, those questions do not include who the next coach is going to be because we already know that with Dennis Allen getting the job. And we're going to go into that. We're going to go into what I'm looking at. We're not going to get into all the questions. We're going to get into what I consider to be the top 5 most important questions that need to be answered. And we're going to start off right at the top with what I consider to be the only hire that I'm really concerned with right now. And that is, who is the offensive coordinator going to be for the 2022 NFL season and beyond in New Orleans? Now, there are a lot of coaching positions you're going to want to talk about. There are a lot of questions up and down the roster, but the Saints hired Dennis Allen. The Saints made the decision to hire Dennis Allen. And to me, the biggest difference between a Sean Payton head coach team and a Dennis Allen head coach team, when your head coach is so invested in the offensive side of the ball, the offensive coordinator position becomes not less important, but less emphasized in terms of how much control are you asserting in that situation. That is flipped now. Now that is on to the defensive coordinator, who is going to be under Dennis Allen. Dennis Allen is still going to call the plays, just like Sean Payton called the plays on offense. Dennis Allen's going to call the plays on defense. So the defensive coordinator position is down further on my list. But that offensive coordinator is now empowered with the offense. He is going to be in charge. He is going to be the rock star, if you will, of that group. And that is a hugely important hire. To me, if the Saints were going to go and try to run it back with kind of a clone of the Sean Payton philosophy, whatever interpretation they found of that, they probably would have tried to elevate someone in-house, right? Pete Carmichael would have been the obvious option. It doesn't look like that's going to be the case. Looks like he's going to be on the staff in a different role. And I think when you look at it, that's because you want to have a splash hire. You want to have a rock star hire here. To me, I think Eric Bieniemy makes the most sense. If you look back and you say, okay, we want someone who has a cachet, who has strength about him, who can lead that group and kind of define what that post-Sean Payton offense is going to be. And I think he's the guy. He'd be my pick. The only question to me is whether he wants to do that, whether he's going to go back to KC, whether he's going to go somewhere else. His contract is up in Kansas City. He's been there since 2018. He's been very successful, but I think just much like Pete Carmichael behind Sean Payton, he's been kind of lost behind Andy Reid. He's kind of, whenever you're on a staff of an offensive wizard, you're going to have a hard time standing out as the offensive coordinator. And whatever you want to say about head coaching hires and all this, I think when you look at the kind of broader scheme, and I think that's been something that's affecting how he's not been able to stand out in that role. So I think the ability to come back to New Orleans and kind of take ownership of that offense would be huge in terms of a guy who just can't seem to get over the hump in the head coaching carousel. He could come to New Orleans and kind of own that. Hey, and it probably doesn't hurt if you're a guy who has been passed over for a lot of these jobs to go to a franchise that clearly appreciates promoting from within. Now, you could flip 1 and 2 here, and I think you'd be fine. But to me, this is the order it has to go in, because question number 2, who is the starting quarterback? I don't think the starting quarterback for the 2022 season is in the building right now. I think it is going to be someone you bring in one way or another. Now, that could be Jameis Winston, because he is technically not in the building. He's a free agent. But I think if I'm the Saints and I'm looking at all these quarterbacks on the board and I'm looking at my defense saying we have a win now defense, what we don't have is a win now quarterback. I'm looking up to snowy Wisconsin. I'm looking up to Green Bay. I'm looking up to Aaron Rodgers. And I'm saying, how many tires do we have to kick to get a deal on the table here. Now, I know people are going to say, hey, the Packers came out and said, hey, we're committed to Aaron Rodgers, blah, blah, blah. We're going forward, blah, blah, blah. Of course, they're going to say that. You have to say that. What is the alternative to saying that? If you say anything else, best case scenario, you're getting lowball offers everywhere. I don't take that to mean there is no way they're trading Aaron Rodgers. I take that to mean if you're going to trade for Aaron Rodgers, you better pony up because we're not giving him away for nothing. But at the end of the day, they drafted Jordan Love in 2020, the first-round pick. They are not in the business. NFL teams are not in the business of wasting first-round picks. And at the end of the day, if Aaron Rodgers doesn't want to be there, which is pretty clear heading into the 2021 season, they were able to work that out. But if he's not in love with the situation, he wants to get out of there. I don't think Aaron Rodgers is the guy you want to be working against if you're the Packers. So if I'm the Saints, I know this information. I can go and I can try to sell them on a trade. The ball might not be in their court, right? The Packers have already stated that if they traded Aaron Rodgers, they'd want to trade him out of the NFC. And I wouldn't put it past a team like the Packers to take a lower offer on the table just to keep him out of the NFC. I don't know who that team would be in the AFC would be making that trade, but if it's on the table and they take it, there's nothing the Saints can do. But I do think if you're the Saints, you want to make sure that you do everything you can to try to secure that trade if you can get it. I mean, how often do you get the chance to bring in a first ballot Hall of Famer at the most important position on the field? How often? And I think if you're the Saints and you, again, are looking at your win now defense and thinking, hey, if we have a win now quarterback, we could win now. I think you have to do it. I think, but I do think you want to do that. And hey, if that doesn't work out, I think you find out early in the offseason whether that trade is potentially on the table because it's going to involve a lot of assets and the Packers are going to want to make sure it happens before the draft if it happens. And then if there's nothing on the table there, I am 100% confident you can bring Jameis Winston back at whatever amount of money you have to give him to bring him back and be comfortable with it. Because I think he showed through his 7 starts that he is more than capable of winning games with the Saints, especially winning games playing well alongside a Dennis Allen defense, right? And so you're okay with that. You're okay with that. And it's not a question of whether Aaron Rodgers or Jameis Winston is better. It's a question of what you would be getting in Aaron Rodgers. And there are questions with Jameis. He only saw 7 games. He's come back from a major knee injury. There is concern there. And I think the benefit of Aaron Rodgers would be too great to pass up. That's not with Jameis, I think you have a very stable option, and it's just a matter of whether you can get him back. I do think if you bring Jameis Winston back, it would be wise to get away from the 1-year deal and see what happens with incentives. I don't want to see that again. I think it made sense this year because you were going into the offseason with the quarterback battle and you didn't know what to expect. Now you know what to expect, at least from the player Jameis. There's obviously questions surrounding his knee. I think 2-3 years guaranteed would be a very healthy scenario as you go into a new head coaching era. And you have a quarterback who is under contract and is going to be there, assuming things work out and things don't fall apart. But hey, that's always something that can happen. That's my take. I think you try to trade for Aaron, and then I think you bring Jameis back one way or the other, and you go from there. We are talking about the 2022 starting quarterback. I don't think it's Ian Book. I don't think it's Taysom Hill. I think it's either Aaron Rodgers or Jameis Winston. Moving on. Number 3. What's the budget? Okay. Before we get into this, I know you're going to say, cap hell, cap hell, cap hell. What the hell is cap hell? I get it. Then the national commentators are going to spend all offseason telling you how messed up the Saints cap is, how little maneuverability they have, how they put money on a credit card, blah, 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 blah. The bill's going to come due. Pump the brakes. Okay. That's really not the case. And while you can argue, hey, the Saints are in cap hell, the Saints have been in cap hell for 2 years, you're not necessarily wrong. But the fact is, if you can descend into cap hell, you can climb out of cap hell. And the Saints have a pretty solid rope that they bring with them every time. And they understand how to manage their cap, how to get under the salary cap when they need to get under the salary cap, and how to do it without making these terrible roster decisions that everyone seems to think are coming. I've seen people saying, oh, they're going to have to trade Marcus Davenport because they can afford to pay him. They're going to have to trade blah, blah, blah. They're going to have to trade Kamara. They're going to have to trade Michael Thomas. They don't. Because they have been planning for this eventuality with their contracts and how they set them up and the cycles that they have their restructures in. Now, That said, I do think there is merit in trying to get a little closer to a comfortable cap scenario so you are not required to make these restructures just to have things work. You want the restructures to be on the table so that you can have maneuverability when you need it. You don't want to have to restructure every contract just to get under the cap. And I think that's the disconnect of how the Saints manage the cap versus how they probably should be trying to manage the cap. But the question to me isn't whether they can fix this $79 million cap shortfall or whatever you want to call it, deficit, anything, because I know they can and they will. It's a question of A, how do they get there? And B, how much money can you free up under the cap to make some moves? Now, we talked about Aaron Rodgers above. Now, one of the things that their cap situation necessitates is if you're going to make a trade for Aaron Rodgers, you would have to do that with some assurances that he would show up and allow you to at least extend his contract so that you could backload some of it and free up some money this year, right? So that is one hurdle that the cap situation presents, that if you had a cleaner cap table, maybe you would get around. But if you're Aaron Rodgers, you're going to a new team, why wouldn't you extend that contract, right? So these are basic things, but the number you can free up is important. And I do think that when you're looking at it, you have to figure that out. And you also have to make the decision of, if you're Mickey Loomis, okay, can we responsibly bring this number down every year? You're not doing it all in 1 year, but you do need to try to bring it back to a more stable number so that you can be proactive and you don't have to restructure 12 deals just to get under the cap so you can make a signing. Because you want to be in a situation where you're spending close to the cap, and then when someone becomes available that you can sign and you want to be able to sign, you have those restructures kind of in the bag and you can just knock them down until you get to the point you need, and then you can make that signing and you're not constantly playing from behind. That's where I think the Saints are trying to get, and that's where they have to be smart, right? A good example is this year. You don't want personnel decisions to be dictated by the fact that you either pay him here or you pay him to play somewhere else, right? If there's a guy that you're on the fence about keeping around, and the only reason you're keeping him around and signing him to an extension is because you already owe money next year anyway, that's just not a stable way, is not the way you want to have to make personnel decisions. Teron Armstead is a perfect example. This year, he's going into free agency. The Saints are going to pay him $13 million next year because it's dead cap. Does it make more sense to sign Teron Armstead and extend that commitment because you're going to be paying $13 million to a left tackle next year? And if you let him walk, you're going to have to pay more to whatever left tackle you bring in because you need a left tackle? Probably. But if you're not comfortable with his durability, he's going to be 31 next season, and you're only paying him because it makes more sense to do that than to let him walk and pay him anyway. That's a tough situation. That's where I can see some of the criticism of how the Saints have handled the cap, and they wouldn't be in quite the situation they're in if not for COVID, and no one could have planned for that. And they were going all in for Breeze's final few years, and fine, I'm not going to argue with that. But I think there are some concessions you do need to start making in roster decisions to just balance things out a little better down the road. And that's where I think you're going to see it. But it does make things complicated. And I think to some extent, you probably do lean toward paying him because you have to, because you have other decisions to make. So that's where I'd like to see. And I want to see where they can create that money, how much money they can create, and then set a line and be there so that next year, instead of 79 million over, you're 50 million over, and it becomes easier and easier and easier. And eventually you're in a much more hospitable cap scenario where you're not constantly trying to make up the money, and then attack. And I think Mickey Loomis would agree with that, and you're going to go forward. But the question I have, how much money can you create? Because I think you can create it. I think you cut Bradley Roby, you save $9.5 million there. You have 4 or 5 contracts that you can restructure. Michael Thomas is one of them. He's kind of a complicated case because you need to figure out how he's going to get back on the field. We'll get back into that in a minute, but it's going to happen. Just calm down. This is not salary cap hell. Anyway, moving on. That was number 3. Number 4. We're on number 4. Who is catching the ball? There are a lot of things we probably have different opinions on. I think we can all agree. Anyone who watched the Saints last season can agree. Watching a football team play offense without a single star wide receiver, pass catcher on the field, that's painful. It's painful to watch. And He suffered through an entire season of it. It's one of the reasons that I have a lot of respect for Jameis Winston's game, because he made that offense look watchable. He did. There's no question. He allowed that offense to look like a team that could win games on offense. Taysom Hill, when he took over, still wasn't a very pretty offense, but he was able to do enough early in games that you allowed the defense to win the game for you. They have to score the points to get the leads, right? The defense wasn't scoring, so Taysom Hill was leading that offense, pinning the team to a lead, and then saying, I'm not going to give this back, and letting the defense close it out. And, say what you want about Taysom Hill. He did exactly what the team needed him to do to win games, and they did. They fell one win short, and it was frustrating. But one way or another, you need to go into next season saying, okay, whoever is our quarterback, we got to do them a favor and give them a pass catcher, because that was not the case last season. Now, the frustrating part for the Saints is you're paying that star wide receiver. You have that star wide receiver on the roster in Michael Thomas. You just haven't seen him healthy in, 2 years, essentially, because he got injured in week 1 of 2020. He was never quite the same. He got back on the field later that season, but he was clearly still hampered by that ankle injury. And we can, that's a fact considering he hasn't played since. He was in that playoff loss to the Bucs. He didn't catch a pass. That's not Michael Thomas. If he's on the field and he's not catching a pass, Michael Thomas isn't really on the field. And getting him back out there at whatever level he is relative to the supernova he was in 2019, that's going to be a huge difference maker one way or the other. He's there, and you have to operate under the assumption he's going to be the star wide receiver that you remember. Now, if that doesn't happen, it's a game changer. But one way or another, I think this team was missing not only a wide receiver 1, it was missing a wide receiver 2. I think Marquez Callaway, Traquan Smith, Deontay Harris, these guys had moments. They had moments. I think Marquez Callaway and Deontay Harris are going to be on the roster next year. I think they're both really intriguing depth options, especially Marquez. If he's your third wide receiver, I love it. But you need that wide receiver 1. You need that wide receiver 2, because putting those guys in matchups against Jalen Ramsey, against these star corners, that's not what you want. Okay. So I think the Saints are very much in the market for a legit wide receiver 2 option. Now, the frustrating part is there are 2 names that I identified early on, midway through last season as guys I was really interested in seeing the Saints sign. One, and they just happen to be both former Giants. One was Sterling Shepard, who I just think is the prototype slot Z, combination type receiver who you want opposite Michael Thomas, who can run these, downfield combinations with tight ends and really just pinpoint route runner that the Saints are going to want at that Z position. Not incredible speed, but good speed, precise routes, good hands. That's what the Saints need to be looking for. Basically, the Emmanuel Sanders role that they lost. Now, Sterling Shepard tore his Achilles. That's a tough one. I could see the Saints still signing him, but it's tough to sign in a season where you watched a team try to play without a wide receiver 1 or wide receiver 2. It's going to be a tough sell to bank on Michael Thomas coming back healthy and Sterling Shepard coming back healthy, or whoever that is. And 2 guys with injury issues. That's a tough sell for me. The other guy we watched yesterday catch a touchdown in the Super Bowl be Odell Beckham Jr. He said himself that he was very close to signing with the Saints. He said right place, wrong time. For a guy who was entering free agency to say that, to me, that's a good indicator that you had a good shot at bringing him home in the offseason, and he just didn't feel comfortable going to the Saints midseason. They had already lost Jameis Winston at that point. He's trying to play for a contract. He doesn't need to go somewhere where he doesn't know who the quarterback's going to be. And I don't blame him one bit. He got a Super Bowl ring. Problem is, midway through that game, he tore his Achilles. He tore his ACL. And man, that timetable is rough. It's hard enough to come back from an ACL injury. It's about, if you're a superhuman like Adrian Peterson, you're talking 8-9 months before you're back on the field. And we're not even talking about NFL. We're talking about back on the field, period. It's hard enough to do that when you tear your ACL in the middle of the season. Tearing your ACL a full month after the regular season ended, you're talking about week 10 probably before you could even hope to get that guy back on the field. So to me, that's obviously not an option. And it's a bummer for whoever was going to sign Odell Beckham Jr. It's an even bigger bummer for Odell, who had, I think, definitely earned himself a massive contract, or at least a sizable one, wherever he ended up. He got a Super Bowl ring, and it's just a bummer for him, but he'll be back. I don't see that guy quitting. But that doesn't solve the situation for the Saints. The positive thing for the Saints in this whole scenario is there are a lot of big name wide receivers hitting free agency, right? You have Devontae Adams, you have Chris Godwin, you have Allen Robinson, and these are the top end names. I have a hard time seeing the Saints freeing up enough money to go after one of those guys, especially already paying Michael Thomas and having question marks with Alvin Kamara. But there are a few other names that I find really interesting, the biggest name being Juju Smith-Schuster. Now, he's a guy who's had injury issues of his own, but he finished the season healthy. And while his numbers have been down in the last few years, I'm willing to bet that's more about Ben Roethlisberger declining than Juju forgetting how to play football, because he was really, really good early in his career. And I think that his abilities kind of stayed the same, and the arm throwing definitely fell off. And I don't think anyone who watched Ben Roethlisberger the last few years would question whether his arm was on the decline. And I'm willing to bet on Juju. I think that would be a perfect fit if they can bring him in. He can be, very similar to Sterling Shepard, not blazing speed, but good speed, precise route runner, good hands. The other guy, Jameson Williams, Alabama. Jamison Crowder, Jets receiver, another guy I think would fit. But I think that's a guy that's the big signing of the offseason. That's the question mark, is who you're going to bring in at wide receiver, because you need it. Whoever is a quarterback, whoever's the offensive coordinator, whatever happens, that wide receiver needs to be there alongside Michael Thomas. When Michael Thomas was healthy, you brought in Emmanuel Sanders. They want that guy. They don't want to rely on undrafted free agents. They want to rely on established pass catchers. And I think you're going to see one this next season. Okay. Number 5, and this is kind of a catch-all. What is the plan for Marcus Williams? Another guy who's approaching free agency. He's not a guy you have durability concerns about. This is not a guy you have quality concerns about. He is a stud safety in the NFL, and I would bet good money that Dennis Allen is not keen on letting that guy walk for nothing if he can avoid it. He played under the franchise tag this year. The Saints could theoretically franchise tag him again, but it gets progressively more expensive every time you do that. And I really don't think the Saints want to continue putting him on a tag for themselves, period, or because, it's kind of it's not a cool move to keep putting a guy on a franchise tag when, you watch guys get hurt, right? This guy is due for a massive contract, a long contract, and he has earned the right to go get it if the Saints aren't willing to give it to him. I think he wants to be here, and I think this is the year you either sign him or you let him go. And I think the Saints are going to try to sign him. I think that he has earned that contract, and I think the Saints know that Malcolm Jenkins is, on the tail end of his career. And this is a win now defense, and you don't want to let it fall apart now. What I do think, and this kind of goes back to Tehran, I think it actually, if the Saints, I think what the Saints have to do one way or the other, they either have to let both Tehran and Marcus walk, or they have to sign both, right? Because it's going to be tough to pay Marcus Williams and pay the future left tackle and the former left tackle, right? It's going to be really hard to make up that gap, in my opinion. So I think that you do work out a deal with Marcus Williams, you backload it, you pay Tehran, and then you go with whatever else you have to go. I think you still draft, if they can get Trevor Penning at 18, love that guy. Watch him at the Senior Bowl. He is a mauler. But one way or another, I think that you have to plan for the future after post Tehran, but you want to keep Marcus in building. I mean, he's been so good. I don't think people appreciate how good Marcus Williams has been. He has a few tackling mishaps, but beyond that, I mean, he is so huge on that defense. But those are my 5 things. Those are my 5 biggest questions. And I know that I didn't talk about the defensive coordinator. I explained that at the top. I still kind of expect it to be Chris Richard, Ryan Nielsen. I think it's going to be an in-house hire because, like I said before, Dennis Allen's going to call the plays. It's not the most important hire you're going to make this offseason. It's an important hire. But I trust Dennis Allen to lead that defense. I have no idea who's going to lead the offense. I don't. And that's a massive part of this equation, and we don't know the answer yet. So that's why I have that number 1. I'd put defensive coordinator somewhere a 6, 7, 8 in that range. But those are my 5 things to recap. 1, who's the offensive coordinator? 2, who's the quarterback? 3, what's the budget? 4, who's catching the passes? And 5, what's the plan for Marcus Williams? But that's it. Thanks for going through that all with me. Again, my name is Jeff Nowak, WWL Radio, Odyssey Digital Sports producer. Make sure to check out all of the latest updates over at WWL.com and Odyssey.com/WWL. If you're watching this on YouTube, make sure to hit that subscribe button. And let me know what you think of this video. Let me know what type of videos you would like to see coming in. Again, I'm debuting this kind of new setup here. I think it looks a lot better than what I was throwing at you last season. So hopefully it's made for a better viewer experience. Let's go into the offseason. Combine on March 1st. We don't have much time to waste. Saints don't have much time to waste. The Dennis Allen era is here. And see if he can hold a candle to the last guy. All right, y'all. Thanks for watching. Peace.